AITA for getting alimony ended when my ex moved in with her boyfriend. Hello, I, 41M, have a 12-year-old son with my ex-wife, 37F. We divorced 5 years ago. As part of our divorce agreement, I've been paying both child support and alimony. My son is my world, and while I've always wanted more time with him, we settled on a custody agreement where he primarily lived with his mom and I got regular visitation. I always thought it was best not to disrupt his life too much. After our divorce, my ex made a big life decision to take in her sister's son, who is now 10. I respect her for stepping up for her nephew, but it definitely changed the dynamics in her household. They live in our old marital home, which is 3 bedrooms, and they made it work for the past few years. Then, about 2 years ago, my ex started dating a guy. Things got serious, and now she's about 4 months pregnant with his child. Not long after she found out about the pregnancy, her boyfriend moved in with her. He has a daughter from a previous relationship, and they decided that his daughter would get her own room. This meant my son and his cousin had to share a room. At first, I didn't think much of the changes at my ex's house. When her boyfriend moved in and his daughter got her own room, I figured it was just one of those growing pains that come with blending families. My son didn't mention anything right away, and I assumed he was adjusting. After all, kids are resilient, right? But over time, I started noticing subtle changes in his behavior. He seemed quieter when I picked him up for our scheduled visits. Usually, he'd chatter away about school, his friends, or what video game he was into that week. But now, he barely talked unless I asked specific questions. Even then, his answers were short and lacked his usual enthusiasm. One day, after I picked him up for a weekend visit, I noticed he seemed especially off. I asked him what was wrong, and after a little coaxing, he opened up. He told me he hated sharing a room with his cousin. At first, I thought it was just typical kid stuff, maybe a few squabbles over space or toys. But as he explained, I realized it was more than that. They didn't even ask me, he said, his voice cracking a little. One day, I had my room, and the next day, all my stuff was shoved into the corner so she could move in. My heart sank. It wasn't just about sharing a room. It was about how the change had been handled. My son felt like an afterthought in his own home. He talked about how his cousin had different routines that clashed with his, like staying up late to watch videos while my son was trying to sleep or leaving their shared space messy. He didn't feel like he had any privacy or control over his own space, and it was clear it was affecting him deeply. What really broke my heart was when he told me about the room arrangements. His mom and her boyfriend had decided that his daughter needed her own room because she's only here part-time, so it's easier for her to have her own space when she visits. My son felt like he was being pushed aside to accommodate everyone else. "It's not fair, Dad," he said, looking up at me with tears in his eyes. "Why do I have to share when she doesn't? It's my house, too." I tried to reassure him, telling him that I understood how he felt and that his feelings were valid. But I could tell that wasn't enough. That's when he dropped the bombshell. "Can I just live with you full-time?" I wasn't expecting it. For years, I had quietly hoped he'd want to live with me, but I never pushed for it. I thought it was important to let him decide when the time was right. So when he finally said those words, I was stunned. I asked him if he was sure, and he nodded. "I love Mom," he said, "but I feel like you actually listen to me. And I don't have to share everything when I'm with you." That hit me like a ton of bricks. I realized that this wasn't just about sharing a room. It was about feeling heard, valued, and respected. That weekend, we had a long talk about what it would mean for him to live with me full-time. I explained that it might take time, and that it wasn't something I could promise right away, because we'd need to go through the courts. But I also told him that I'd do everything I could to make it happen. When I dropped him off at his mom's house at the end of the weekend, I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me was angry that she hadn't considered how these changes would affect him, but another part of me felt hopeful. For the first time, my son had made it clear that he wanted to change, and I was determined to fight for him. That conversation was the catalyst for everything that followed. It's what made me go to my lawyer. not just for custody, but also to look at my financial obligations. If my son was going to live with me full-time, I needed to make sure I could provide the best possible life for him, and that started with taking control of the situation. After deciding to move forward with terminating alimony, I braced myself for the fallout. I knew my ex wouldn't take the news well, but I underestimated just how intense her reaction would be. When the court ruled in my favor, officially ending my alimony payments, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. On one hand, it meant I could redirect that money toward building a better future for my son, especially with the possibility of full custody looming. On the other hand, I knew it was about to unleash a storm. The first call from my ex came the same day she received the court's decision. She didn't even say hello. Instead, she launched straight into yelling, her voice a mix of anger and disbelief. "How could you do this to me?" she shouted. "You know I'm pregnant. How am I supposed to keep the house and take care of the kids without that money?" I tried to stay calm and explain my reasoning. "This isn't about punishing you," I told her. "It's about making sure I can provide for our son, especially if he ends up living with me full-time. I still pay child support, and that money is for him. But alimony isn't my responsibility any more now that you're living with someone else." That explanation didn't go over well. She accused me of being selfish, vindictive, and only thinking about myself. I reminded her that the decision wasn't arbitrary. It was a legal consequence of her choice to cohabitate with her boyfriend. But she didn't want to hear it. "We're struggling, and you're just making it worse," she snapped before hanging up on me. The fallout didn't stop there. Within days, I started getting texts and calls from her friends and even some extended family members. They accused me of abandoning her during a difficult time, especially with a baby on the way. Some of the messages were downright nasty, calling me a deadbeat and questioning my morals. One of her friends went as far as to post a long rant on social media, painting me as some heartless ex-husband who was punishing a pregnant woman out of spite. She conveniently left out the part about her boyfriend moving in and the fact that the court ruled in my favor based on the law. For a moment, I thought about defending myself publicly, but I decided against it. Airing dirty laundry online would only escalate the situation, and I didn't want to drag my son into the drama. The most surprising part of all this was her boyfriend's reaction, or lack thereof. Despite my ex's complaints about their financial struggles, he never reached out to me directly. I found it strange, considering he'd moved into the house and taken on the role of her partner. If anything, it reinforced my belief that he should be contributing more to their household instead of relying on alimony from her ex. While all of this was unfolding, I did my best to shield my son from the chaos. He's only 12, and the last thing I want is for him to feel caught in the middle of a financial dispute. Still, he's perceptive and started picking up on the tension during drop-offs and pickups. One evening, he asked me point blank, "Why is Mom so mad at you?" I hesitated, trying to find the right words. "It's complicated," I said carefully. "Sometimes adults don't agree on things, especially when it comes to money. But I want you to know that none of this changes how much I care about you." He nodded, but I could tell he was still processing it. "She said you don't want to help us anymore," he added quietly. That hit me hard. I knelt down so I could look him in the eye. "That's not true," I said firmly. "I'll always do everything I can to take care of you. The money I send is for you, to make sure you have everything you need. But some things, like alimony, are different. That's not about you, and it's not something I need to pay anymore, because of how things have changed." He seemed to accept that explanation, but it was clear he felt torn. I hated that the situation was putting him in a position where he felt like he had to choose sides, even indirectly. It only strengthened my resolve to fight for full custody. Ending alimony wasn't just about the money. It was about fairness and priorities. My ex had made a series of choices, bringing her boyfriend into the house, rearranging the family dynamic, and deciding to have another child. Those were her decisions, and she had every right to make them. But I also had a right to step back from financially supporting her lifestyle when it no longer aligned with my role as her ex-husband. Despite her protests, I still pay a significant amount in child support, and I've always gone above and beyond to ensure our son has what he needs. The money I save from no longer paying alimony isn't going into my pocket. It's going toward our son's future, whether it's for college, extracurricular activities, or even just a savings account he can access when he's older. I want to make sure he has a strong foundation. Still, the backlash has been exhausting. It's hard not to feel like the villain when so many people are coming at you, even when you know you've made the right decision. But at the end of the day, my focus is on my son. The custody battle is still ongoing, and I'm determined to do whatever it takes to provide him with the stability and support he deserves. As expected, the custody process has been anything but straightforward. It's dragged on longer than I hoped, with hearings being pushed into the new year. In the meantime, I've been doing everything I can to prepare my case and make sure my son's voice is heard. But as things progress, it's becoming increasingly clear just how hard my ex is fighting to keep the current custody arrangement intact, and how much strain this is putting on everyone involved. Since my son told me he wanted to live with me full-time, I've made a point of spending as much time with him as possible. Every weekend, holiday, or extended visit is an opportunity to make him feel heard and comfortable. He's thriving when he's with me, doing better in school, staying more focused, and generally seeming happier. At my house, he has his own room, a space where he can be himself without interruptions. He's even started picking out ways to decorate it, telling me, "When I live here all the time, I'm going to get posters of my favorite players on the wall." He's clearly looking forward to a future where he feels prioritized and has the stability he craves. Unfortunately, things at his mom's house aren't getting any easier. During one visit, he confided in me that the tension between him and his cousin has grown worse. "It's like I'm invisible," he said. "Everyone just cares about the new baby and her boyfriend's kid." It broke my heart to hear him say that. I know my ex loves our son, but her choices have created an environment where he feels like an afterthought. And the fact that he's aware of it at such a young age speaks volumes about how deeply it's affecting him. Meanwhile, my ex has been pulling out all the stops to challenge my custody request. She's arguing that my son's desire to live with me is just a phase and that he's being influenced by me. She's also claimed that her household is more stable because it's where he's always lived, and she doesn't want to disrupt his routine. But her definition of routine is exactly what's making him so unhappy. Sharing a room with his cousin, being pushed aside for her boyfriend's daughter, and now the impending arrival of a new baby. All of these changes have disrupted his life far more than moving in with me ever could. To strengthen my case, I've been working closely with my lawyer to document everything. I've saved texts, emails, and even notes from conversations where my son expressed his feelings. My lawyer has also suggested involving a child psychologist, someone neutral who can evaluate my son's emotional well-being and testify about what's best for him. I'm nervous about how that might play out, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show the court that my son's best interests are with me. With the holidays approaching, emotions are running even higher. During a recent drop-off after a weekend visit, my ex pulled me aside and accused me of turning our son against her. She said he'd been distant lately, barely talking to her and spending all his time in his room. I tried to explain that his feelings were coming from how he felt treated in her home, but she wasn't having it. "You're just trying to take him away from me because you can't stand that I'm moving on," she snapped. It's frustrating because this has never been about her or her new relationship. It's about my son and what he needs to thrive. I told her as much, but the conversation ended in the usual shouting match, with her blaming me for everything wrong in her life. Later, my son told me he'd overheard part of the argument. He asked, "Is Mom mad at me because I want to live with you?" I reassured him that none of this was his fault, and that all I wanted was for him to be happy. But it's hard not to feel angry that he's being dragged into the middle of this conflict when he's the one who's already struggling the most. As we head into the next phase of the custody battle, I'm more determined than ever to fight for what's right for my son. The process is draining, emotionally, financially, and mentally, but I know it's worth it if it means giving him the stability and support he needs. The next court hearing is set for early January, and my lawyer feels optimistic. We've gathered strong evidence to show how much my son's well-being has improved when he's with me, and how unhappy he's been in his current living situation. Still, I know this isn't a slam dunk. Family court decisions can be unpredictable, and my ex isn't backing down without a fight. In the meantime, I'm focusing on what I can control. Being there for my son, listening to his concerns, and making sure he knows he's loved and supported no matter what. This custody battle has been one of the hardest challenges I've faced, but it's also been a powerful reminder of what it means to fight for someone you love. My son deserves to feel like a priority, not just another piece of a complicated family puzzle. I don't know how things will play out in court, but I do know one thing. I'll never stop advocating for my son's happiness and well-being. Whatever it takes, I'm committed to giving him the life he deserves.